Thanks for the introduction. I'm a late sub for Graham Whitmarsh, who's the head of the Climate Action Secretariat. As Deborah said, I'm the executive director of policy, and usually my job, which I enjoy greatly, is to go out and talk about the carbon tax. But it was such a good job of that done at lunch that I don't think I can follow Guy's story, and besides, you don't want to hear me sing. So, I am going to talk a little bit, just to sort of animate discussion a little bit about one of the, I guess, the key impacts of climate change, or associated with climate change in BC, and then maybe we can springboard off that into a bit of discussion about how we deal with it. But just further, by way of introduction, the Climate Action Secretariat is the lead on policy and coordination across government on climate change. Most of the work on adaptation is actually led out of the Ministry of Environment, which works in close cooperation with some of the other ministries like Forests, Agricultural Lands, and Energy. And I think Ben's still here, and I'll probably point the hard questions to him anyway. I put this slide up because it illustrates the impacts in BC that most people are already familiar with, but I wanted to remind them anyway. The mountain pine beetle has now affected an area of BC of about 13.5 million hectares. It's an area 4 times the size of Vancouver Island. Over the past 2 decades, it's killed about 300 million trees. And I guess to put that in context, the BC Business Council estimates that just simply the loss of stumpage revenue associated with the mountain pine beetle amounts to about $300 million a year. That's money that we could be putting towards health and education and infrastructure. $300 million a year would buy us a new hospital every year. And that's just one of the impacts of the pine beetle. Aside from the loss of the forests, what we're getting as well is, not surprisingly, increases in slope instability and impacts on water resources as well. In terms of the other impacts, obviously, we have a lot of communities in BC that are very heavily dependent on forests and the forest sector, and dealing with the impact of the mountain pine beetle is going to be extremely difficult. It already is. And it compounds existing and pending problems in markets on top of that. Maybe there are some opportunities here. Hopefully we can extract some of that resource before it simply rots in the forest and use it to produce other products, to create energy, and that would be a good thing because that would obviously help us to mitigate future impacts of climate change as well. I guess what I wanted to ask is, if we had known about the risks, would we have done things differently? I suspect we probably would have done things differently. We might have not planted the same species in the same places as we did, knowing the potential risks from climate change. We might have managed forest fires differently in a way that didn't contribute so much to creating a hospitable environment for the pest. We might have done things differently, so that kind of raises the question, can we now, with a better understanding of the risks and with better analysis, manage things differently going into the future? And I guess one of the key things that we're learning from the Ministry of Forests is the need to build in a broader set of policy objectives into forest management, and in particular focus on enhancing the resilience of those forests. Another area, just briefly, in which we plan for current climates is protected areas. BC's actually done a pretty good job of setting aside protected areas in BC over the last couple of decades, the purpose of which was to protect and enhance biodiversity, protect ecosystems. But we kind of did it with the current climate in mind and not necessarily thinking that those ecosystems had to move or might have to move. And now it's not so clear that they will easily be able to move given the kind of structure we set up. So what do we need to do? Well, obviously we need to continue to develop a better understanding of the risks. We need to be willing to build those risks into planning and into policy. And we need to stop talking in silos and deal with this across our departments, across our governments, and with other jurisdictions as well, with the private sector and communities, and get out of our silos. That's not exactly rocket science. I mean, that's just what we should be doing anyway on a whole bunch of other risks that face us. Climate change is just really creating another level of urgency to do this in a better way, and just adds to a bit of the imperative. I'll stop there.